There are families that carry stories, and then there are families that carry curses. Tonight we step into the forgotten hills of West Virginia, a place where time seems frozen and silence lingers heavier than the fog. In these hollers lies a family that the world was never meant to see, a family whose very existence blurs the line between tragedy and horror. They are called the Whittakers, and for decades their story remained hidden until one day the world pulled back the curtain. Picture this, a dirt road curling into the Appalachians, so isolated that outsiders rarely dared to enter. Along that road, a small, weathered house stands in eerie quiet. From its porch, strange sounds echo into the valley. Not words, but grunts, barks, and unintelligible noises. This is not fiction. This is the Whittaker family's reality, a living testament to what years of isolation, poverty, and inbreeding can do. The Whittakers are not a tale whispered to scare children. They are flesh and blood, people trapped in a cycle passed down through generations. For years, their lives unfolded in complete obscurity until documentaries and photographs exposed them to the world. What outsiders found was both heartbreaking and disturbing. Individuals who could barely communicate, siblings who barked like dogs, and expressions that carried centuries of hidden suffering. But here is the question that grips us. How did they get here? What happened in the hills of West Virginia that created a family so infamous, so haunting, that the mere mention of their name sends a chill down the spine? The truth is layered with silence and shame. It is a history buried in the isolation of Appalachia, where communities often survived by marrying within generation after generation. But the Whittakers became something darker, an extreme case of a bloodline folding in on itself, creating genetic shadows that altered both body and mind. This is not just the story of one family. It is a story about the dangers of secrecy, the curse of isolation, and the way history itself sometimes hides in plain sight. Tonight, as we begin this descent into their world, remember this. What you are about to hear is not just disturbing. It is forbidden, the kind of truth society often wishes would remain buried. To understand the Whittakers, we must first travel back into the deep folds of Appalachia, a land of mountains, valleys, and endless silence. Generations ago, families here lived cut off from the rest of America. Roads were few, schools were distant, and survival meant relying only on the land and on each other. Over time, isolation shaped not just their way of life, but also their bloodlines. In these mountains, families married within their own circles, sometimes cousins, sometimes even closer ties. It was not seen as shocking then, it was survival. In remote hollers, choices were limited and communities often kept to themselves. The Whittakers were one of these families, but unlike others, they became locked in a cycle that would one day turn their name into a symbol of both tragedy and fascination. Imagine a small log home built from rough timber, standing alone among trees that whisper in the wind. Inside, kerosene lamps flicker, while children huddle close to a fire. Outside, neighbors are miles away, and the only voices heard are those of kin. Year after year, generation after generation. The world outside advanced, but the Whittakers remained frozen in their own hidden time. This isolation carried consequences. Slowly, the family line began folding inward. The traits of inbreeding began to show in ways both physical and mental. Some children could not speak, some grew with twisted features. Others learned to survive in silence, communicating only with grunts and gestures. What might have been dismissed as quirks in one generation became more severe as the years went on. But the tragedy here is not only genetic, it is also social poverty wrapped around the Whittakers like chains. Without money, without education, and without connection to the wider world, they were trapped in a cycle that could not easily be broken. Outsiders rarely visited, and when they did, they often left quickly disturbed by what they witnessed. nest. The mountains protected the Whittakers from outsiders, yet those same mountains also imprisoned them. Their world became a closed circle where the past repeated itself endlessly, and no one dared to intervene. It was a secret hidden in plain sight, waiting for the day when someone would stumble upon it and reveal to the world the haunting truth of this family. For decades, the Whittakers lived unseen by the outside world, their existence whispered about only in local towns, like a dark secret no one wanted to face. Then one day, curious outsiders ventured into their hidden valley. The first encounters were nothing short of shocking. Outsiders expected poverty, but what they found was something far stranger. As strangers walked up the dirt path toward the weathered Whittaker home, they were met not by greetings, but by sounds, strange guttural noises that echoed across the yard. Some of the family members barked like dogs. Others grunted, unable to form words. Their eyes carried a mixture of confusion and fear, as though the very presence of outsiders was an invasion into a fragile, hidden world. The first visitors described scenes that seemed unreal. A family sitting on a sagging porch in silence, while chickens scratched at the dirt. A home filled with broken furniture, cracked walls, and the weight of years of neglect. Inside, photographs of generations long gone stared from the walls like ghosts, reminding all who entered that this was not a recent story, but one stretching back into forgotten time. Local townspeople had always known about the Whittakers, but they rarely spoke of them. To some, the family was a source of pity, to others, a source of shame. But to outsiders, the encounters felt like stepping into a nightmare, a vision of humanity distorted by both isolation and bloodline. The grunts, the barks, the vacant stares. It was as though centuries of silence had taken human form, and yet behind the haunting presence of the family, there was also something deeply human. When outsiders looked closer, they saw vulnerability. A family surviving in their own way, clinging to each other because they had nothing else. The Whittakers were not monsters. They were people shaped by forces beyond their control, generations of poverty, neglect, and choices narrowed by circumstance. The first encounters shocked the world, but they also raised questions. Who was to blame? Was it the family themselves, or was it the world that left them forgotten in the shadows of the Appalachian hills? The truth lay somewhere in between, a truth both disturbing and heartbreaking. The world might never have known the Whittakers if not for the lens of a camera. When documentary filmmakers and photographers finally stepped into that hidden valley, they carried with them a light that would pierce through the shadows of generations. For the first time, the Whittakers were no longer just a secret in the hills of West Virginia. They became a story for the entire world to see. The images were haunting. A family gathered on a sagging porch, their clothes worn, their eyes distant, their words replaced by grunts and animal-like sounds. To many viewers, it felt less like a family portrait and more like a glimpse into another world. People stared in disbelief, wondering how such a family could exist in modern America, a country that prided itself on progress and civilization. The footage spread quickly, igniting debates across media. Some saw the Whittakers as victims of neglect, abandoned by society to suffer in silence. Others saw them as an example of what happens when isolation and inbreeding consume a bloodline. The reaction was divided between shock pity and morbid fascination. Yet one thing was certain, the Whittakers could no longer remain hidden. The spotlight, however, was not kind. Cameras captured their most vulnerable moments, turning private lives into public spectacle. The family who once lived in silence now found themselves displayed for millions to watch, dissect, and judge. Strangers who never set foot in West Virginia now spoke with authority about their lives, their struggles, their very existence. But within the unsettling spotlight lay a deeper question: who had the right to reveal their world? Was it an act of exploitation, or was it a necessary exposure that forced society to confront uncomfortable truths? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the story of the Whittakers became both a warning and a wound, a reminder of how easily human lives can be reduced to curiosity. In though see moments, the Whittakers were no longer just a family, they became symbols. Symbols of secrecy, poverty, tragedy, and the hidden costs of generational choices, their name etched into history not by their own will, but by the relentless gaze of outsiders seeking to uncover what was forbidden. As the spotlight grew brighter, the story of the Whittakers turned darker. For generations, their family tree had folded inward branches, looping back upon themselves until the roots could no longer stretch outward. The curse of bloodlines was no longer myth. It was visible in their faces, in their voices, in their silence. Inbreeding is not just a word. It is a slow erosion of possibility. When cousins marry, cousins when choices shrink to only those within reach, the consequences echo through time. Children are born with limited abilities. Some cannot speak. Some cannot learn in ways others can. Their bodies show the weight of repetition, their minds trapped in cycles they never chose. For the Whittakers, this curse was not born of malice, but of isolation. They were not seeking to break laws or defy nature. They were simply surviving in a place where survival meant choosing what was near, and what was near was always family. In those mountains, the outside world was not a savior. It was a ghost that never came. But curses have a way of growing stronger in silence. Each generation carried the shadows of the one before, until the family became a living example of what happens when time forgets a people. Outsiders looked at them with horror, but behind the horror was a mirror, a reflection of how society allows the forgotten to remain forgotten until their suffering becomes spectacle. The Whittakers carried the weight of centuries, not by choice, but by birth. Their lives a testimony of how bloodlines, when trapped in circles, can become prisons stronger than any walls. They were symbols not just of inbreeding, but of abandonment. Symbols of what happens when humanity turns its back on its own, and yet within the curse lay resilience. The family continued to endure day after day, surviving in ways that defied expectation. Their story is not only one of tragedy, but also of endurance. For while the curse of bloodlines left its mark, it did not erase their humanity. It did not strip away their place in the story of America. By the time the world came to know the Whittakers, their story was no longer only about one family. It became a window into something far larger, a reflection of how many are left behind in the cracks of society, hidden in valleys and mountains far from the promises of progress. There are countless others whose lives are marked by silence and struggle. The Whittakers were simply the ones caught in the beam of a camera. Viewers who watched them were divided. Some could not look away, horrified by the barking, the grunts, the confusion. Others looked deeper and saw not monsters but people who had never been given the chance to step beyond their valley, people who lived and died without doctors, without schools, without the safety nets most take for granted. The world judged them, yet the world had abandoned them long before. The Whittakers revealed a truth few wanted to confront. Poverty can be as binding as chains. Isolation can be as dangerous as disease. When generations are left without options, they do not rise, they sink. They build lives with what they have, even if what they have is not enough. And slowly, what begins as survival becomes a legacy etched into bloodlines. But in every haunting detail, there was also a plea, a reminder that humanity cannot be measured by appearance or ability. The grunts, the silence, the fragile gestures of affection between family members spoke of bonds that survived even in the darkest conditions. They may not have had the words to speak to the world, but they had loyalty to each other, a loyalty many in the outside world had forgotten. The Whittakers became both a mirror and a warning. A mirror showing how easily humans can slip into the cracks of neglect. A warning of what happens when communities are left to fade into shadows. Their story forced society to face its own failures and left a question hanging over everyone who watched. Who else have we forgotten? Who else lives in silence waiting for the world to notice? The Whittakers stand today not just as a family in the hills of West Virginia, but as a living echo of everything society would rather not see. Their lives are etched into history, not through choice, but through exposure, through the eyes of those who came to document their reality. The silence that surrounded them for generations was broken, yet what remains is not clarity, but unease. Their legacy is a reminder that humanity is fragile. When cut off from the world, when trapped within the boundaries of poverty and isolation, the human story bends in ways that shock and disturb. Yet within the same story, there is a haunting beauty, a testament to endurance. The Whittakers endure still, their grunts and stares, their quiet gestures, their survival in the face of every barrier speak of lives that refuse to vanish, even when forgotten. For outsiders, their name became a symbol, a warning of what inbreeding and isolation can create. But for those who look deeper, it is also a question. How many other families live in silence, unseen, unheard, unknown? If the Whittakers are the face of forgotten America, then how many faceless others remain hidden in valleys and shadows, waiting for the world to notice? The legacy of the Whittakers is not just about bloodlines. It is about neglect. It is about what happens when a society chooses not to care, when the powerful look away and the vulnerable are left to survive alone. Their story is not only the tale of one family, but a chapter in the larger book of human history, a chapter that forces us to confront what we fear. As the camera lenses close and the voices of documentaries fade, one truth lingers. The Whittakers are not simply a curiosity, they are a mirror. Their story forces us to ask who we are as a society and whether we can continue to ignore those who suffer in silence. For in the end, the true darkness is not in their bloodline, but in the silence of the world that allowed them to be forgotten.